Tēnā koutou katoa, and welcome. Now, many of you will know Susan. Susan is a global leader in transition engineering, recently taken a chair at Heriot-Watt University, up at Edinburgh stroke Orkney, which is where I believe the workstation is. But many of you in New Zealand especially will know Susan from her time at the University of Canterbury. And of course, Susan is also the author of Transition Engineering, Building a Sustainable Future. So welcome, Susan. We have these podcasts occasionally, and it's great to have you on board for this one.
Kia ora. Nice to see you. Thanks for getting up early in the morning so I didn't have to stay up too late.
Right, first of all, before we get into the details of transition engineering and quite what's involved with it, can you tell us a little bit about your journey, please, to getting to this point? What inspired you to take up transition engineering?
Well, I think I was inspired from very early on when I went into mechanical engineering, wanting to work on sustainable energy. So this was back in the early 80s. When, of course, the OPEC oil embargo and the oil shocks were happening. And, of course, we did know about global warming back then, back in the olden days. Yes. And then when you're doing a mechanical engineering degree, they don't actually ever have a class on sustainable anything. So I stuck around and did a master's in energy systems engineering. So in that, I got to do solar and wind and energy efficiency in buildings. And that was because I went to one of 4 universities that had an energy program in the United States. Then I did my PhD. I started off in biofuels, and then that biofuel just really wasn't workable. So just went and did material science, and then was looking for a position in energy. And at that time, in around 2000 in the United States, energy really only just meant hydrogen or maybe algae biofuel or something. And I'd already been doing hydrogen. I had started a company and worked on hydrogen engineering. And so I was quite over that. And I just wanted to go back to energy. And I wanted to ask the big question, okay, what are we actually going to do about this? And I saw a place advertised in New Zealand where they said you could just, they were looking for somebody in energy. So packed up the family and moved to New Zealand, as you do.
Mm-hmm. And why not? Many of us have.
Yeah. And so I spent 21 years there, and really, because there's not a Department of Energy, because there's not, big oil companies or whatever, you can just sort of work on energy, the questions that you think need to be answered. And for me, it was, how are we going to change what we are doing? And I get that what we're doing works, that it's cheap, that it, everybody enjoys using the fossil fuels, but there's this little thing called science. And also there's this little thing called intergenerational equity. And in my lifetime, we could use almost all of those low cost, high quality fuels, and leave behind a huge mess. And so can't we do better than this? Is there a way that humanity evolves where it corrects when it's doing the wrong thing? And in energy, what would that look like? So, of course, we moved out way beyond energy to transportation and products and housing and urban form. But I'll tell you that's where transition engineering came from with, I will say, one more proviso. I probably might have just kept working on energy, renewable energy and things like that, if my son hadn't asked me, well, Mom, are those things going to work? I mean, is that going to solve climate change? And I had to think like, oh, probably not. We actually have to change what's wrong. And so that was really quite the spur, especially when I said, I sort of came clean and said, okay, probably not. And he said, well, then you have to figure out what will work. And I think we've all had those moments where we've had to just step back and take a look and go, what if we're kidding ourselves?
Mhm.
We need to not kid ourselves and figure out how to change. So that's what transition engineering is. Fun to do, and hopefully now will spread like wildfire.
Well, they do say out of the mouths of babes, don't they,
Yeah,
sometimes?
true,
And
true.
that's obviously an example of it. So thinking about transition engineering then, what is it? Is it a discipline of engineering? Is it an underpinning philosophy that should interface with other disciplines of engineering? What's the headline or the soundbite that actually explain the difference between transition engineering and quite what it means?
All right. Well, if I was going to write the Wikipedia definition of transition engineering, I would say it is a corrective transdiscipline that cuts across all of the fields of engineering and technology. And like other corrective transdisciplines, like safety engineering, risk management engineering, natural hazards engineering, disaster management engineering, security engineering, it is a way to deal with the failures of existing systems and correct them by just doing that. So all of those things that I mentioned are corrective transdisciplines, and they have actually quite simple methodologies that all engineers carry out as duty of care. And probably you know what I'm talking about. Risk management engineering, there's a graph or a matrix with high impact, low impact, high probability, low probability. That's a tool for assessing risk that did not exist at some point, and then it existed, easily teachable. It tells you what you need to know, and so we can all do it. So it's very participatory. Safety engineering, identify the hazards, right? That's what you do. You identify the hazards. So transition engineering is like that. And it essentially says change what needs to be changed.
Yeah, you touched there on tools and techniques. Are there any specific tools and techniques or methods of analysis that are associated with transition engineering that we should all be learning about?
Well, I really think there are, and that's why I put them in a book. And the first thing that you sort of run into is that sort of the same thing you do in safety engineering, where there's been an accident and you have to look at that accident and you have to say something went wrong and we're going to figure out what it was. And if you think about that, that's only been happening for the last, decades in some fields and some places. It just feels more, what would you call it, self-preserving to just tuck it under the rug, right? To just ignore that there was a failure. But safety engineering is a discipline. It says we're going to look at the failures. Well, in transition engineering, we're going to look at the unsustainabilities. The unsustainabilities. All right. And that takes that same sort of courage and honesty because you have to admit what is actually unsustainable. But once you look at it, that's the very first start. And that is the key, because once you look at what's unsustainable, now you know what the project is. You know what you might not know how you're going to do it, but you know what the job is. You have to change what's unsustainable. So that's the first thing, and it's a perspective. The second thing is wicked problems. So being able to identify and define a wicked problem and to park and unpack it. And that's actually a thing you do with stakeholders, with community members. So we have a little tool that we use for unpacking wicked problems. And then we have a 7-step method that you do. It's a stakeholder journey method, but with engineering along the way. So that it usually, well, there's a class at Canterbury right now that teaches that in about 6 weeks, how a bunch of tools and the perspectives so yeah, it's like safety engineering in that sense, that it's not something that you have to get a PhD in.
Right. Well, that's good. That's good for many of us. Tell us a little bit as well, please, about the Global Association for Transition Engineering, because that's something that's emerged over the last, I think, decade or so. So what was behind that, and what are you hoping to achieve through that?
Right. Well, the idea for that actually came when I was invited to give a talk on transition engineering in 2011 in London at the across from Big Ben is the IMechE headquarters. And so I was giving one of their, I don't know, invited talks. And so a very big auditorium full of presumably engineers. And apparently they believed what I said.
Good start.
It was a good start. And so after the talk, there was a group of probably 20 or 30 people who wouldn't let me go. So we went to a pub and we were there till closing, and they were just sort of brainstorming that, well, this is what everybody has to do. And, you know, it doesn't matter if it's 100% right yet, it's good enough. Now we can get started and we'll make it better as we go along. And somebody said, well, you know, that's like, you know, well, I had said in my talk that like safety engineering, we can get better just by being better. You know? And so what we did was we started looking at the history of safety engineering and other of these transdisciplines, these corrective transdisciplines, and they all follow the same pattern, which is they have a basic, easy to follow construct that everyone can do. It is socially responsible to do it, so therefore the reason to do it is clear. And then you get an association, because even though it's obvious we should do it, we must do it, it takes courage. And so it's a lot easier to do if you've got linked arms with somebody else, right? You get in the scrum and do it. And so they started work in England putting together the Global Association for Transition Engineering as a professional organization. And God help them, it took them 6 years to get through the paperwork and the bureaucracy.
Yes.
I never would have been able, never in a million years. But they were, you know, fellows of IMechE and that, and so they knew the bureaucracy and they worked their way through it. And so yeah, it's actually been only about 5 years that the gate has been a legal entity with a bank account. And now we still have another 5 years to go before we get the ability to charter engineers as, but we now can have memberships and we can certify courses, and we can act as a charitable organization. So it's a really big accomplishment, actually.
Well, it is. Congratulations for
doing.
for getting that up and running, even if it does take a long time. So what's next for transition engineering? Where is it heading at the moment, and what are your aims for the future? What do you see as the way forward, the ultimate goal, possibly even?
Well, it turns out that the what next, you know, New Zealand really did have a head start in this area, because that's where it was born out of. And there are transition engineers in New Zealand, a lot of them. And so the actual biggest membership of Global Association for Transition Engineering is the New Zealand group. And there's Transition HQ, which is a professional organization that will match up people who, you know, or councils or companies who want to address these challenges of unsustainability, and match them up with engineers who are certified transition engineers. So the what next, you can look at New Zealand to see what next. Because yeah, they've been doing it. There's also courses, CPD, the continuing professional development courses at Canterbury, and so that's, you know, that's where a field goes. That's how it emerges. So now I'm setting up a course that will start in August in the UK. So that will be 3 years behind New Zealand. And where
That's
we're
great.
going in the UK is just doing it. Just, it really is like safety engineering, that there are centers where people can learn and there's education, but mostly it's about the professional carrying out and sharing what you learn and writing standards. And so we're starting off on the first standards project as well.
Okay. Well, good luck with that. I'm sure you don't really need luck. You'll push that through, I'm sure. Certainly, if your record in the past is anything to go by, that will be with us and bear fruit, hopefully
That's
for the
right.
2030 goals and the 2050 goals that we have around the world.
Oh,
Um,
I should say the other really big and amazing development is that a company called Educate Global that makes teacher training for K through 12 for primary, middle, and high school teachers that they have to keep their certification and do trainings. So they train whole schools at a time in education about climate change, carbon literacy, environmental science, and they found my book. And so I've been working with them on doing transitioneering kids, and they're
right.
teaching kids, and it's really working out so amazingly because the kids know that things are in trouble, and and they want to know, how do we do something about it? Okay, so do we go protest? Is that what we do? But no, you actually, there is a way to march through change and to take others with you. And so, yeah, the kids love it.
Well, that's
So that,
terrific.
to me, I mean, it's not in my direct line of sight, but it's huge. So yeah, look for that too.
Well, I think that's something we all need around the world, isn't it?
Mm,
Everybody being involved and everybody embracing the need to change as a first
great.
instance, and then actually going on and changing. So if you had one key message, you know who we are. We work with energy and carbon management professionals in New Zealand predominantly, a little bit overseas as well, but predominantly NZ. If you had one key message for people working in those areas, what would that be?
It's time to stop kidding yourself. We really can change, but you have to be looking at the change. You have to actually do it. So don't be afraid. Get my book, read it, you'll get it,
Yeah.
and hire a transition engineer and get on with it.
And if there was one thing that we could all go out and do tomorrow, or today, it's the start of my day, obviously the end of yours.
Right.
But if there's one thing I could go out to do today to push that change forward, what would you suggest that would be?
All right. We have our method is 7 steps, right? It's a given that when we understand there's a problem like carbon, we want a solution. Man, we want it. You can just feel yourself grasping. There has to be a solution. So stop that. Don't do that. It's a complex system. It's wicked problems. Just stop that. And
Yeah.
what you're going to do is you're going to get my book, read it, and start thinking like a transitioneer. And that means I'm going to start by looking at what's unsustainable about something I know. And then I'm going to just start through this process. And I'm going to believe that it'll be okay. I will find something, and I'll find others like me, and we'll get going on it. So stopping the solutionism, it really stops creative thought. It stops innovation. Get over the hydrogen. It's not a thing. Stop grasping at solutions and start thinking for yourself.
Yeah. A very interesting perspective. Susan, kia ora. It's been great to talk to you. We wish you all the best with your relatively new job, with the ambitions that you have for transition engineering. Good luck with that. As I say, you probably don't need it. You can push that forward, I'm sure yourself. You've shown that in the past. But yeah, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. And hopefully we'll see you very, very soon back in NZ.
Oh yeah, we plan on it. There's a new grandbaby back there, so.
Right, so we
I will
will.
find some things to do in New Zealand that increase the utility of the carbon I must burn. Let's put it that way.
Excellent. Susan, thank you very much, and hopefully we will see you soon. Kia ora.
All right. Thanks for calling.